Welcome back to the homestead. Friday night, it's raining and snowing outside, so we decided to tear into the Apocalypse truck's engine. We knew we needed to do some work on it. We knew they had an exhaust leak, so it had a little bit of a skip. We've torn into it. We found the number 8 cylinder is not firing. It could be plugs, could be wires, could be the cap and rotor. All look very suspect. This had a weird set of headers on it that the pipes all went up around and they were all wrapped, and the plug wires had all of these fiberglass boots on them, and you can see holes burnt in the boots. And the other thing that, you know, and I don't know, you can subscribe to whatever school of thought you want, but anybody I know that's been around small block Chevys for their lifetime will tell you that don't run anything but an AC Delco plug. It had some kind of NGKs in it, but you can see the number 8 is all black and sooty, obviously not firing. You know, the other ones are pretty dirty. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to actually do a compression test, at least on the number 8 cylinder. We may do all of them just for the fun of it. The engine is supposedly fairly new, and it does show signs of that. All the bolts have blue paint on them where somebody torqued everything when they put it together. So we're just going to kind of pick away at it, and we're going to go get some new plugs, some new wires, a rotor and a cap, and a new set of headers are coming Monday, and that'll tell us a lot. The distributor is loose, so we have no idea where the timing was when we got it. It may be very retarded. It's sort of what it felt like. It almost felt like it's skipping a little bit, but stuttering a little. So, you know, we're just going to go through it, and we'll bring you along for that ride. So I'm going to grab the camera from Sue. She's going to jump in the truck, and we're going to do a compression test, and then we're going to go ahead and check the valve adjustment, at least on number 8, depending on what we find in the compression test. We think that the valves are probably all fine. They're hydraulic lifters, so they only have to be just so close. Essentially on these, what you do is you make sure the rocker arm is loose by having the other valve partly open. Well, actually the way you do it is you roll the engine over until the exhaust rocker starts to move. And then you go ahead and you adjust your intake lifter. You know, on these small block Chevys, the way you do it is you start tightening down the rocker arm nut and spinning the push rod in your fingers. And just as soon as you feel you know, some friction on the push rod, you give it another quarter to a half a turn on the rocker. And then you can roll around until the intake opens and do the same to the exhaust. And there is actually, I believe you set the distributor for number 1 firing, and you can do like half of the valves. And then if you set it for number 6 cylinder firing, you can do the other half. So if you're comfortable that you can do that way, if you're not, you do each cylinder one at a time by knowing the other valve is open and that valve should be closed. So I'm going to grab the camera. Sue's going to jump in the truck to run the starter. And we're going to go ahead and watch our pressure gauge as she rolls it over. And you want to roll it over, you know, 6 or 7 revolutions without touching the throttle. So I'm not sure if you can see that, but let me get you down in there. We had a good solid, it's leaking down a little bit because I didn't get it tight in there. We got a good solid 175 to 200 PSI on that cylinder. So there's nothing wrong with the cylinder, which is what I suspected. So we're going to check a few more, and then we'll bring you back if we find anything odd there. But we'll bring you back and show you when we check the valves and when we put plugs and wires, the cap and rotor and all that. So we'll be right back. We've been to the auto parts store and we picked up cap and rotor, plug wires, plugs, and some valve cover gaskets. So on these GMs, the coil is in the valve cover. I mean, yeah, valve cover. No, the coil is actually in the distributor cap. You'll notice how corroded it is down inside there. In this residue, you'll notice that the rotor button is pretty burnt on the tip. And we'll show you what the new one looks like. One thing I always like to look for in these GMs is I find over time this plastic breaks down. Sometimes they'll fire through into the distributor cord. But we'll show you what the new one looks like. And when you're buying these, you always want to make sure you get the brass terminals. So you can get this with aluminum terminals, or you can get it with brass terminals. And I find that the brass ones last a lot longer. You're going to have a new button, a seal, and some destructions, and a rotor button. So you'll see what I mean by how, you see the difference in how short that one is compared to that one? That one's arced all the way back. Maybe I can get you a side-by-side view too. See how that one's turned up so much more? And it's up past this edge, and this one's back past it. It's pretty worn out. I've never seen one quite that bad. So we're going to tear the coil off this distributor cap. Now we know which one's number one. We put a mark on it. So one of the things we're going to do is mark that cap before we put it back in, so we know which plug wire is number one. If you're not comfortable with like the firing order and stuff like that, you can take this cap off and set it beside the distributor, put that cap in there, and you can move one wire at a time. But it's pretty easy. You get it's usually on the intake if you've got a cast iron intake, or you can look it up online real quick as well. So you take that cover off, set it aside. We're going to get a Phillips screwdriver and a pair of needle nose. So the coil is actually held in with 4 screws. And then we're going to pull the outside 2 prongs up out of here. And then the coil picks up out of there. Just like that. You'll see there's that button and gasket I was talking about down in there. And then we need to get this ground. And that can be a little tough to get because it's down inside that hole. If you turn it around and just give a little push on it, it'll come right out. So we're going to set all that aside. Going to get a new cap out. Unfortunately for you guys, unfortunate for us, you're going to get to find out just how well this thing runs, like in the next 10 or 15 minutes. We're going to have to wait 2 or 3 days because the new headers won't be here until Monday afternoon. And that goes down in there like that. This just sits back down in that hole like that. The coil sits on top of it. Now we're going to put our coil down on top of there. Just like that. These screws are only going into plastic, so you can tell when they bottom out. You kind of want to stop right there when they do, not go too far. And we're going to put our wires back down in our holes. And we'll put our cover on. So now we're going to go ahead and mark these. You'll notice our markers right here. So 1, 2 back from that. And I'm going to mark that to let me know that is number 1. You'll also notice that our coil cover here has a crack in it. I'm not too worried about that. It's not really that wet of an area up there, but we may keep an eye open in the shop next time we're down there and see if there's one laying around. So then what we're going to do is we're going to put this back on the truck. So in preparation for putting it back on, you want to get all your bolts turned out like that. And what's going to happen is when we set that down on there, it is keyed, so it'll only go one way. We're going to push them down and turn them so those prongs go in under the distributor and hold it. So we're going to get a few things set up and we'll bring you back when we get ready to put this on. Alright, so we've climbed in under the hood of the truck and the distributor is back here. On a small block Chevy, it's in the back. Pretty easy access. Hopefully you guys can see that okay. Okay, Sue says you can. So this is what's called a one-wire distributor from GM. And this is a switched positive wire from the cab right here. And then this wire comes out of the distributor, so this one doesn't really count. So why they call it one wire is it needs just a single battery positive wire to make the whole distributor work. It has a vacuum advance, has an electronic ignition module inside, and a pickup coil down in here. And of course, as you saw, the coil is in the cap. So what we're going to do, I'm actually going to plug this in first, and this is keyed as well, so it'll only go one way. It has a little notch cut out of the plastic right there, and a little tit on the plastic right there. And that just plugs in, just like that. Then your tachometer and your power, it's labeled right here, tach and battery. So tach is the one closest to me. And then battery is that one. And then we're going to sit that down on there until it's just like that. And you'll see it doesn't turn. It is, like I said, keyed. I'm going to push these down. And you can usually put your finger on it down below so you can tell when it's gone under the distributor. And that's all there is to putting the cap back on. Except for we made a big goof. We forgot the rotor button. It's not going to start without a rotor button. So there, we're going to plug our vacuum advance back in. And this is loose. We did it, I think we mentioned that before, but previous owner never tightened it down. So that's about as far as we can go for today until we get the headers. Because I don't want to put the spark plugs in and try to fit the headers down in there, because if I drop one, I'm going to break all 4 spark plugs off. So we'll probably get the valve covers back on it and bring you back when we do some gapping of the spark plugs, installing some headers, and getting this thing to fire and see if the skip has gone away. So hold on, we'll be right back. Some light here. Bear with me a minute. Now you might be able to see now. So when you're putting your valve cover back on, the biggest thing you want to watch for is that you don't pinch any wires. And before you take it off, you want to make sure there's not a bunch of crap laying in there that's going to fall down in there when you do it. So we've gone ahead and we've put our gasket on. We put just ever so slightest bit of silicone on the valve cover to hold the gasket in. And we're just going to kind of figure out the best plan of attack here. I'm also trying to make it so you guys can see, so that adds a bit of a... So, I'm just going to set that down in there, see if we can get around the wires on the alternator. Just like that. And then you put your 4 bolts in, and you don't want to tighten these, and that's probably not helping you any. You don't want to tighten these until you get them all started. And we're just going to snug them down. And you can hear it change noise. But basically, these, I just go until I bottom out. Because there's a shoulder inside the valve cover that sets right against the head. And just went my way through them. All right, so we're gonna go gap our spark plugs real quick and get them ready. And then we're gonna have to take a break and wait for the headers to show up. All right, so we've got our AC Delco R44T. And you can buy some really expensive plugs. We kind of just like these old AC Delcos. And I don't know, you know, it's one of those, maybe it's a wives' tale, but the old man always swore, and any old timer I've ever talked to always swore by, you always use AC Delco in a GM. You always use Motorcraft in a Ford. And I always kind of wonder if some of these new fancy plugs, if this older ignition system really has the heat to fire them like they want them to be fired. And when these are right, they work just fine, and they're cheap. I think we paid $2.99 a piece for these. So if you kind of plan on, you know, every other year changing your plugs and wires, depending on how many miles you drive. But what we have to do is we have to check the gap. I don't know if you can see that or not, but there's a center electrode that comes up in the middle out of that white porcelain. And then there's a little ground piece that comes up over that. And it's a gap in between those two. So there's a couple tools you can use. You can buy one of these little gauge wheels that you can put in there and turn it until you find your, we want to be about 45 thousandths. So you see it's just a little tight. So what I do is I just rocked it just a little bit. And I'm going to call that pretty close. There you go. So there's 45 thousandths. Now another way you can do it is with feeler gauges. This is a lot quicker because you can start way down in the 20 or 30 thousandths, and you can just kind of, you know, leverage it up and down a little bit like that to loosen the gap up until you get to the 45. So we're going to go through, we're going to gap all 8 and have them ready. We'll bring you back when we have a set of headers here, and we'll see if we can't make this thing make some noise. All right, so we've got our headers in. You can look under here and see. We didn't do much video of that, but it's pretty straightforward. They just bolt right to the head. This side here, we did run into an interference issue. It took me a few minutes to figure out what I was running into. There's actually a couple brackets bolted to this head for the old plug wires, and that's what we were running into. But now we're all good. So we're gonna climb up in here and we're gonna start putting plug wires on, starting with number 1 on this side. So do the odd side first, and then we'll do the even side over there second. I've got all my plug wires laid up here so I can see the length of them and figure out what fits the best. And just in case, I've written down the firing order. So what that means is basically in a clockwise rotation around the distributor cap, that's the order they'll go in on the cap. Alright, so we got all the plug wires on. I'm going to grab the camera. We're going to have Sue jump in the truck and we're going to see if this thing will fire up.
Ready?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Ready?
Yep.